Our passage this morning is Mark 2:18, all the way to chapter 3, verse 6. It's on page 786 in the Pew Bible. I'll give you a second to turn there. Mark 2:18 through 3:6. Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him? And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again, he entered a synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. And he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him about how to destroy him. This is the word of the Lord. It's my privilege this morning to introduce to you Jeremy Meeks, who will be preaching for us this morning. Jeremy Meeks is a pastor at Christ Church Chicago, and he is also the director of the Chicago Course on Preaching. The Chicago Course on Preaching is a residency program of the Charles Simeon Trust. He created it. He's the main instructor for it. And I had the unique privilege of getting to be a part of it. I got to sit under his teaching for a year. Jeremy has dedicated his life and his ministry to training preachers because he is committed to God's word and the work that God does through it in the world. I remember one time Jeremy sharing about a similar pastor years and years ago who also had dedicated his life to training other preachers. It was said of this pastor that his students feared him as much as anybody they had ever feared in their lives, but it was only matched by their affection for him. And Jeremy then said, "This is my aim." And Jeremy, I'm halfway there. One of the most important things Jeremy ever taught me is that preaching is an act of love. It's an act of love for the people that will be sitting under your care and hearing the word of the Lord as you explain it and proclaim it. And it's because of that we work hard at it, diligently at it. We're thoughtful with it. And it's knowing that Jeremy views preaching as an act of love that I am excited, both for myself and for you, to get to sit under his teaching this morning. So with that, I give you Jeremy Meeks.
Good morning. It's good to be with you in the great state of Wisconsin. Yeah. I don't want to talk. Listen. Everything's going to be great as long as we don't talk about baseball. It was great to get to know some of the people who were involved in worship this morning. Heard about all kinds of stuff. Stephen, where are you? Where's Stephen? Happy birthday, Stephen. Birthdays are great. They were way better when you were a kid. But they're always great. One of the greatest things about birthdays is getting gifts. I remember as a kid getting and this is going to be, for some of you young people, this is going to be strange, but I got a combo cassette tape, CD, radio. It was awesome. Now, if you are under the age of 40, you can come up and talk to me afterwards about what a cassette tape and what a CD is. Let's just say that it was a mind-blowing experience. It was so much better than the tiny radio I used to have. Getting new stuff is the best, isn't it? We get something and we just think to ourselves, out with the old and in with the new. There was only one problem with my cassette tape, CD, radio combo. And that was, it was significantly larger than my tiny radio. Why was that a problem? Because I had a much harder time hiding it next to my bed and listening to it to the wee hours of the morning. I liked that thing, but in some ways it wasn't nearly as satisfying as what I had. Isn't that the way that goes so often with new stuff? You get all excited for a minute, but then you're just like, but what I used to have. If you have the benefit of having grandparents, you probably hear about this every single time you talk to them. Things aren't the way they used to be. And it's true to some extent. Because here's the question, is new stuff always satisfying? Don't you sometimes wish for what you once had? If new things aren't always satisfying, then why are we drawn to them? It's better, faster, stronger. But it doesn't always work in life. And the weird thing is, it never works with God. I don't know how much you know about God. Maybe you're not a Christian and you're I don't even know what I'm doing here today. Or you're a new Christian and you're I'm trying to figure all this stuff out and put all the pieces in place, but this Bible's a really big book and stuff. Maybe you're a Christian, though, and you've kind of lost the wonder of exactly what it is to be a Christian. The title for my sermon this morning from this interesting chapter of Mark is Out with the New and In with the Old. I really want to just answer one question in this sermon. What's so special about the coming of Jesus? I'm sure if you're a member of this church, you're I know the answer to that one. That's good. But it's always good to be reminded. What is, we talk about this Jesus guy all the time. We sing about him. You're a good and gracious king and stuff. And we're I believe that, but why? What's so special about the coming of Jesus? Now, the answer to this question in this text might disturb you. I know that's the case because it's definitely disturbing the religious experts in Jesus' day. Now, we're going to run into them in all three of the scenes that we see today. They're called Pharisees. This weird, rather small sect of very dedicated individuals to the religious life of Israel. If you were here last week, you saw them have their run-ins with Jesus. This whole opening section of Mark constantly going at these Pharisees. Really, the Pharisees are coming at him. These people were religious experts, and they were supremely dedicated to putting new things in place to make sure that life didn't go off the rails. You see, life had gone off the rails. If you are familiar with the Old Testament, especially as the Old Testament draws to a close, there is a significant problem. People had been, let's just say, blatantly, ignorantly disobedient of God's rules. They knew what the rules were, but they just ignored them and then just said, let's do something else. As a result, they were thrown off into exile. God, in his gracious plan, had said he was going to, and then eventually did bring them back to himself. There was a real question in coming back, especially because life wasn't so good when they came back. How are we going to make sure this never happens again? And there were lots of answers to that from different communities. The Pharisees' answer was rules. Let's have more rules. I heard about this math teacher back in the day. During our time over there, when I learned about Stephen's birthday, this math teacher that used to put kids in a box who were being bad, which I think we should bring back. My suggestion was we should do it for people who fall asleep in church. Just have a box up here. We could call a timeout and be like, get in the box. There's always they had all these rules. They're like, okay, we're going to make sure we never get in trouble again. Let's keep the old, but bring in the new. And they're rather upset with Jesus. Makes sense. I mean, Jesus just claimed to be God because he said he had the ability to forgive sins. And not only that, this guy has the audacity not only to claim and then uncomfortably prove that he can forgive sins, but he's also hanging out with the wrong people. You got to follow the rules. You don't hang around with tax collectors and sinners. Those are the bad people. This confrontation continues in our section and escalates rather quickly. All revolves around these religious rules. And as strange as that might sound, is it all that different for you and I? You don't have to be a Christian, but especially for the Christians. Let me see if this sounds familiar. We don't have to have a show of hands. You come to know Jesus and the amazing grace that's found in him through his death and resurrection, and that he graciously provides to make everything right, to forgive your sin, all your disobedience against God, make you right with him through everything that he did. Free. And you go, oh, that's so great. You're telling people about it, check it out. There's this Jesus thing. This is awesome. And everybody's like, okay. But then as time goes by, you're like, oh, and you should do this thing. And you should do this other thing. And you should do this other thing. Things that aren't necessarily in the Bible, but just, decent things. And so when somebody's like, yeah, I'm interested in this Jesus, you're like, okay, but listen, you got to get on my level. These new rules just find themselves slipping in all the time. But even if you're not a Christian, and you're like, I don't believe in this God or whatever, don't you have rules for life that, let's just be honest, while they make sense to you, are patently ridiculous? When you really think about it, if you're really honest with yourself, just all the right ways to live. I don't care if it's eating kale, which is gross, or running, or whatever your thing is right now. We just put all these rules in place. We're like, this is how we're going to make sure life goes well. Well, guess what? We're all on the same team as the Pharisees. At least our tendency is to be like them. They're upset with Jesus. And as we heard earlier, Jesus is rather upset with them. So what's so special about the coming of Jesus? Well, as we see in our first little story in chapter 2, verses 18 through 22, we see the newness of Jesus. There's a problem. The problem is that the disciples of John the Baptist, the guy who prepares the way for Jesus, and the Pharisees are all fasting. And as they're fasting, then some people who are looking at the Pharisees and John's disciples. They're like, okay, they're fasting. Jesus, we got a question. Why are your disciples not fasting? Now, what you got to know is this question from the jump is kind of absurd. Why? Well, because in the Old Testament, over and over again, the people of God are called to fast exactly one day a year. During the Day of Atonement, this high holy day when God, through his own rules, said, hey, here's exactly how we're going to have a sacrifice that covers the sin of the people. Prepare yourselves one day a year. So you might read this and go, oh, well, maybe it was that day. Nope, not that day. By this time, the Pharisees had said, forget that. We're gonna fast 2 times a week. Which just sounds miserable, right? But I think scientifically, fasting is good for you or whatever. So if you want to have a conversation with me about fasting afterwards and its health benefits, cool. But we're not talking about health benefits. We're talking about new rules to show how serious we are about dedication to God so nothing goes wrong again. So they're like, it's a legitimate question. Hey, why aren't your disciples fasting? All these other religious, serious people are fasting. So why aren't your disciples fasting? In classic fashion, Jesus answers a question with a question. As you're going through Mark, I want you to observe how many times Jesus directly answers a question. Buckle up, because he almost never does. Here, he gets this perfectly legitimate question, given the kind of cultural context of religious people. Apparently, Jesus is a big religious deal. So why aren't his disciples fasting just like everybody else, showing just their seriousness and their dedication and their holiness to God? And Jesus goes, oh, okay, good question. Verse 19, can the wedding guests fast when they have the bridegroom with them? They cannot fast. Let's just be honest, that is a very weird way to answer the question, why are your disciples not eating? And Jesus goes, because it's a wedding party. What? Now, that is, of course, and remember, these Pharisees were experts in the Bible. And there's some very well-known prophecies in the Old Testament. The craziest of them, perhaps, of all these kinds of things, is that these prophecies talk about that something new is coming. And as you get to the end of the book of Isaiah, there's all these prophecies about this crazy thing that's going to happen on the backside of exile and how wonderful and awesome it's going to be. And we're given all kinds of stuff. But in Isaiah 62, it says that God is going to come like a bridegroom to his people. It's going to be a wonderful day when everything gets put back right. And Jesus here goes, hey, don't you know? The bridegroom's come, which isn't just a vague allusion to a Jewish marriage ceremony. He's actually saying, sideways, I'm God. The thing that you've been waiting for, the thing that you actually think you are getting ready for through your fasting, that thing, ta-da, here I am. And so now it's a party time. And by the way, I know that Wisconsin weddings are probably awesome. In the land of encased meats and cheese. However, Jewish weddings were something else. Week-long party. And Jesus is going here it is. You know that whole thing about God coming to his people? It's here. You should be celebrating right now. What are you doing fasting? Then he has this weird comment. The day will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. And then they will fast in that day. What? Doesn't make any sense. Of course, if you know anything about the Bible and how the rest of Mark is going to play out, you can't help but read this passage and knowing kind of what Jesus is hinting at. Jesus is not being clear here. He's purposely being obscure because nobody's going to get what Jesus is going to do. But what he's saying is, in the day that I die, That'll be a sad day. That day isn't now. Right now is the day for celebration, because the thing you've been waiting for, and your grandpa was waiting for, and your great-great-grandpa was waiting for, that day is now. Completely obliterating the new religious rules they'd all set up for themselves. In case that wasn't enough, then Jesus gives two very common household illustrations. New cloth on old garments, and new wine and old wineskins. This is just household logic. That would be ridiculous. Ask anybody in here who's into sewing or into fermenting things. It's Wisconsin. You don't do that. You don't do that. Why? Because the cloth just rips apart. The new wine just busts the old wineskins. It's a foolish thing to do. In other words, what Jesus is saying is, don't think that I'm a Band-Aid on your old, messed up, invented rules. I don't know what you think about Jesus, but Jesus isn't just there to help you come up with your own religion. Which again, if you're new to Christianity, you're not a Christian, and you think this whole Christianity thing is all just a bunch of rules. Not according to the guy it's named after. He comes along and goes, no, your religious rules are ridiculous. The ones you make up for yourself. I'm not here just to kind of help you along and just be another piece of the puzzle that you've created for yourself. See, the newness of Jesus is the thing you've been waiting for has come, so out with the new and in with the old, in the sense of everything you've ever been waiting for. You see, I think what this text is arguing for, because remember, Mark is writing these things down to persuade his audience of something. I think what he's arguing for is that this Jesus guy completely reorients our disposition towards God's rules. There are rules. There are the ways that God wants us to live in the world. And thank God, God gives us the ways we should live in the world. Because imagine if God had just come down and said, listen, I'm God, you're not, so follow me. We would be tossing virgins in volcanoes and all kinds of crazy stuff. I don't know. He said we should follow him. What are we supposed to do to follow him? No, he's kind enough to go and you don't have to get creative. Just do what I say. And it's going to go great for you, by the way. It's going to go awesome. All you got to do is do what I say. And pretty much from the start of God saying that, which was really early on in the Bible, people were like, yeah, but what if we added some stuff to that? You get crazy events like this, in Jeremiah is probably my favorite example. God comes through Jeremiah and talks to the people, and he's like, okay, you are burning your children alive, which I never asked for. And in a bold statement, he goes, that didn't even come into my mind. Which is pretty bold for God to say. He's like, I didn't just do the things I asked for you to do. Now, why would anybody burn their children alive? Easy. Because that's a pretty serious level of devotion. There's only one problem with it. It's not that it's serious, it's that it's completely invented by them. Now, nobody was harmed in fasting, but yet Jesus is just you don't have to do this. He reorients our position towards God's rules. It's not simply add things so that it's realize the fullness of what's coming. Here it is. I'm right here. This is the newness of Jesus. And you go, okay, that's cool, but what does this newness of Jesus bring? Which is exactly what Mark talks about these next two stories. Both of them centering around Sabbath. Now, fasting was a big deal. Sabbath, huge deal. Fasting, once a year. Sabbath, once a week. Now, the Sabbath thing isn't something that the Jews invented for themselves. It all goes back to Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. In Exodus 20, God goes, listen, I created everything in 6 days. Seventh day I rested. You do the same. In Deuteronomy 5, he goes, guess what? You need to rest because you were slaves. Don't forget about that. And then I freed you from that. So work 6 days and then rest. Like, not just like take a nap, although that naps are awesome. But worship me. Realize that it's all down to what I can give to you. It's a blessing to you. Unlike when you were a slave and you just had to work every day. The problem is that by the time we get to the time of Jesus, that Sabbath thing had turned into one of the craziest, most restrictive days you could possibly imagine. I'll give you two examples, two of my favorites. We could do this all day. There's huge books written about what you could and could not do on the Sabbath. So, for example, if you were somehow incapacitated in a leg and had to ordinarily walk with a cane or a staff, you weren't allowed to do so on the Sabbath. Why? Because if you make a hole in the dirt and then possibly wind blows a seed into the hole, and then if the wind blows dirt over the hole, and then it rains the next day, and then a plant grows, you were laboring. Therefore, all you handicapped people stay home. Also, there were different kinds of animals you could and could not capture on the Sabbath. So you want to go turtle hunting? Totally appropriate. I don't know why you would want to go after a turtle, but that's fine. But you could not catch a rabbit. Why? Because rabbits are fast, and you're probably going to have to move around too much. That's a no-no. And you're like, are you just making this up? Nope, you can go and read it. There's huge lists of these rules. Why? Because these new rules were showing how serious they were about this day. We're not going to mess this up again. We're going to hold fast to these rules. The problem is, of course, as we get into this story beginning in verse 23, one Sabbath, Jesus going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, the disciples began to pluck heads of grain. That right there is what we call harvesting. You see, it wasn't wrong to eat on the Sabbath. It wasn't even wrong to walk. You could only walk a certain distance, because too far, that's a problem. But it wasn't the walking, but it was the actual work of harvesting. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this. I would encourage you to. It's disgusting, but I'd encourage you to just like pluck heads of grain and pop them into your mouth. It's kind of gross, but at least it's a snack. The Pharisees come along and go like, ooh, time out, Sabbath. That's a no-no. Who do you think you are? Don't you know the rules? Don't you take the rules seriously? The experts have a point. They are technically harvesting. Once again, though, there's the question in 24. Why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And Jesus says to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he entered the house in the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. Okay, that's a long question. But he answers it with a question. But even the way he begins it is like the most offensive way you could ask a question to religious experts. In other words, haven't you ever read the big book you're all experts in? Like, whoa. They were sitting around going like, yes, absolutely, we have read 1 Samuel 21. That's where that story comes from. Again, it's kind of a weird way to answer a question. What is Jesus doing with the question? Well, he's establishing biblical precedent for something very simple. that the preservation of life is more important than simply following the rules. He's not saying all the Sabbath rules don't matter. What he's saying is get the order right. See, you all think that it's just about rules. But God's rules are there to preserve life, which is where he gets to with this comment. Super encouraging, not only for the people it's a rebuke for the people he's speaking to. It should be an encouragement for us. Right there in 27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Now, while it's talking just about the Sabbath, this 1 day and 7 to rest, it's true of all of God's rules. You and I were not created in order to follow God's rules. God's rules are there as a blessing for us. I wonder if that's how you view God's rules. Not just as things to do in order that God won't be mad at you, or that he made you just so he could torture you with all of his rules. I think it really comes down to this question. Do you think God knows better than you about how to live life? And if you're a Christian, you're probably like, yes. And the question, of course, is like, well, does your life evidence that? And I don't mean with the easy rules. Just think about like the hard things. So, for example, don't kill. For some of that's a challenge. Others of us were like crushing it, have killed nobody today, or that I know of yet. So I'm good. If that's a negative command, think about the positive implication of that command. Love your neighbor as yourself. So these kinds of moments that we go, okay, yeah, generally. But what you got to understand is, every time we do that, guess what? We just fall right into the Pharisees' trap. We're like, there is a loophole here. I'm sure I can invent one. It's so easy to fall into the trap and think that like, well, okay, fine. I'll love my neighbor as myself. But you just follow the rule because it's the rule? Or is it because it's actually a blessing? I mean, the blessing is pretty easy to figure out. While you might like to, or I might like to come up with an excuse for that neighbor, don't hope all your neighbors love you. Wouldn't it be a better Milwaukee if everybody just, loved each other? See, we're not made for the rules are made for us. Including this rest thing. We don't do it just because it's like, well, I got to follow the Bible. I mean, just imagine how great it is. Imagine how liberating it is. You get every single week a day to go, not mine, God's. And to rest going like, yep, even those 6 days, the only reason I can go to work is because God gave me the ability to go to work. I guess it's all his. I guess I'll just take a break and celebrate the fact that God is the one in charge of all of this. Sabbath is for us. We're not made for it. Who's this Jesus to say this thing? So the Son of Man, verse 28, is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's in charge of it all. And it's not this like, so you better follow Jesus now. It's like, take the blessing that he provides. He's going like, look, out with the new garbage that you're putting onto the Sabbath, and then with the old, take what the Sabbath was always meant to be. It's a blessing for you and a blessing for me. And live in light of that thing. Just in case that wasn't enough. Here's a third story. Same thing, Sabbath deal, but this one is in a rather unique space. A synagogue, according to verse 1. What's a synagogue? Well, that's the place where Jews would have essentially what we're doing right now. Songs, prayers, somebody explaining the Bible. It goes into that space. So we're talking about a very important place on a very important day, the Sabbath. And we read here this editorial comment that's one of the saddest things you'll ever read. It's right there in verse 2. And they, talk about the Pharisees, watched Jesus to see whether he would heal this man with a withered hand from verse 1, so that they might accuse him. A couple things that are tragic about this verse. Number one, they don't care about the man with the withered hand at all. This man with the withered hand, for them, is just a puppet. Second thing that's tragic is they are not asking the question, can Jesus heal him? They're pretty convinced he can, which makes sense. I mean, he just made a guy who was paralyzed walk. So clearly Jesus got some kind of healing power. So they're not asking the can he question, but the will he question. I mean, the tragedy of this is that they're hoping to entrap him by it. In other words, their desire is to do evil if Jesus does good. I don't care if the man with the withered hand stays the way he does or doesn't. They don't care about that at all. They're just like, we hope Jesus does something good so we can catch him. Jesus isn't playing their games. He calls the man to him in verse 3. An important question in verse 4. It's kind of a crazy question when you think about it. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm? To save life or to kill? Okay, the first part of the question makes sense. Second part of each question is kind of wild. Just in case you're curious, the answer to the question, first part of the question, is yes. It is lawful both in the Bible and also in the new Jewish laws that they'd all come up with, that it was okay to do good for people, to spare life on the Sabbath. Even if it required some effort, you were allowed to do that. They know what the answer is. They just don't want to say it. Because if they say it, I mean, listen, this is a yes-no question. So if they say yes, then Jesus is like, okay, well, here we go. And if they say no, it's like, the Bible you said you believed in? So they stay silent. They can't say anything. But of course, Jesus knows exactly what they want to do with him. What do they want to do with him? They want to harm him. They want to kill him. All because of the newness that Jesus brings, wrecking their religious rules. And while they're silent, Jesus is angry, verse 5. He looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. See, here's the thing you got to know about this whole Jesus deal. These religious rules aren't just ridiculous, they anger Jesus. And I'm not just talking about the rules they make up, but the rules you and I make up as well. Jesus is mad at all of it. Because, listen, if from the beginning God goes, here's exactly what I want you to do, and we go, thanks but no thanks, we know better. What we're saying implicitly is, I know better than you know. Who do you think you are? Out with the old and in with the new. It angers Jesus. Because it all comes down to a hardness of heart. It's going like, I don't care what your rules are. I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. Which is what all of us said at 14 to our parents. Either out loud or if we were scared in our hearts. And if it angered our parents, imagine what it does to God. Jesus calls the man over and says, stretch out your hand. Just imagine what it's like for this guy. I don't know how long his hand has been withered. He's got the religious experts all like staring down at him. Jesus is clearly angry, so that's complicated. And he's talking at them, but then he has this man in front of him. But I'm really thankful that he's here, and especially thankful that it's written this way, because here's the question. What is it that you and I should do with Jesus? And the answer that the entire Bible gives is trust, believe, have faith in him. In that he's the bridegroom, come from God. God himself come to us, the one who will be taken away through his death and resurrection that makes everything right as he reorients our disposition towards God's rules, making the world exactly the way we want it one day. And he goes, it's all me. And we go, okay, you need to believe, trust, have faith in that. You go, what does that even mean? This man is a great example. He hears from this Jesus who's clearly doing business with the Pharisees, stretch forth your hand. You know what the man's got to do? Do the thing that Jesus is asking him to do. And it takes an incredible amount of faith. Imagine going like, okay, if I'm the man with the withered hand, I'm going to look at my hand and be like, I don't know if you see my hand, the Pharisees see my hand. This thing is broken. It's done, it's gone. There's nothing I could do with this. Yet according to Jesus, he can. If he trusts that Jesus is who he says he is. And who knows what the man knows about Jesus? Even just this morning, if you've never heard any of this at all, you know more than this man with the withered hand knew about Jesus. But what this man does is what, if you're not a Christian, I'm asking you to do. And if you are a Christian, reminding you of what you've done. To do something that seems impossible. To see Jesus for who he is and go, hear the call of Jesus to go like, look, I'm the one you've been waiting for your whole life, and go, okay. And when we're called to go, trust in me, just like he says, stretch forth your hand, you go, I don't know how this is going to work, but here we go. In this text, his hand is restored, verse 5. Can you imagine? Imagine being the man and going like, whoa, this Jesus who called me to do the impossible is exactly who he said he is. We don't know how he ends up. I hope to meet him in heaven one day and shake that formerly withered hand. And just ask him, like, what was going through your head when that was happening? We don't know how he ended up. But here's what I do know. All of those who put their faith in Jesus, who hear the call of Jesus and go, okay, I don't get it. I realize my religious rules are ridiculous. That Jesus is saying, out with the new and in with the old, and that you're the one promised from God to come. And you did everything that okay, I'll trust in you. And I don't exactly know what that means. That's what I'll do. If this story is any indication, that's exactly what will work. But listen, there's a couple reactions to this new Jesus. You could be like the man with the withered hand and have faith and go like, I don't know everything, but I know this, and I'll do what you say, and I'll follow you, and I'll stretch forth my hand even though it looks impossible. Or you could be like the Pharisees. Verse 6. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. You know, the series in Mark hasn't gone on real long since we're just in chapter 3. And you can glance through and go like, oof, there is a lot left in Mark. This series is going to go on for a while. But Jesus is a marked man from death from real early on. Why? Because he says, out with the new, and then with the old. Get back to what the rules of God were supposed to be, a blessing and a gift for people like you and me. And it drives the Pharisees, these religious experts, so mad that they will get in league with the Herodians, who are people who are real big fans of the puppet king Herod. Those people don't ordinarily play nice together. And they're like, look, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And we don't really like you people, but we both hate Jesus because he is both a religious and a political threat, so let's kill him. And they'll keep pursuing him until they actually accomplish their task. course, I'm just going to ruin the end of the book. It doesn't work. Because while they string him up on the cross and kill him, 3 days later, he rises from the dead and says, check it out, that didn't work. Proving that he is this bridegroom come from God, sent here to make it all right. What you and I are called to do is reorient our disposition towards God's rules and go, okay, I don't get it all. But what I do get is that this Jesus doesn't just come like a Band-Aid setting up new rules. He comes to restore the very blessings of God for his people, proclaimed from the beginning of time, for this life and the life to come. For any who, like the man with the withered hand, would go, I believe that you are who you say you are. I'll trust in you. That you're good enough to cast out the new and restore the old. Let's pray. God, we thank you for Jesus. For the fact that he does come and just completely wreck all the pretentious rules that we would set up. Not just because he's mean, but because he's good. Because he desires for God's rules to be a blessing for us. Not to let us live under the delusion that we were created simply to follow the rules, but because the rules are there to be a blessing to us. So would you help us believe that? Would you help us ditch all the rules that we've made up and aren't working and just end up doing harm? That end up angering Jesus because it leads to our lack of care for those around us and simply makes us worry about our rule following. Would you help us celebrate that the bridegroom, the God himself, has come to us? Would you help us rest in the present, knowing that it all belongs to you, preparing for a rest that'll be forever in the world to come, secured for us through this same Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen.